We hit the Inc. 5000 list this year, number 526 in the United States. The first thing that our team said is, how do we hit the list again? What does it take to keep hitting the list?
When you're playing the long game, your urgency of today becomes compounded, or your procrastination of today becomes compounded.
I know I run into this where I'm just trying to do it myself. I'm going to hustle, I'm going to get it done. But the smarter thing to do is I could have gotten it done a lot faster or more efficiently if I just got a different perspective or had somebody to help.
When you ask real true champions, people that are performing at the highest level, what does winning feel like? They use words like brutal, like tough, ugly, rough. That's what winning was. And so just to realize you can have really difficult, challenging times and be winning at the same time. It's this weird dichotomy. I think for us this year was that realization of winning doesn't always feel like this constantly elated. Winning sometimes is just enjoying those victories, taking the moment, but also just being in the middle of that brutal. And you kind of said it before, if you're not facing those, it means that you're not setting your goals high enough. Urgency and long term, when you have both of those, you're gonna win. But if you stick with it, you're absolutely gonna dominate your sector, period.
Welcome back to the Takeover with Tim and Cindy. Can you believe it is the end of 2024 already? In today's episode, we are going to take you behind the scenes into our 2024 reflection. We're going to lay out all the details of our wins, our losses, and specifically what our lessons learned are. So overall, how are your feelings about this year?
This year was a lot of shifts, a lot of changes. But on the other side, I'm so thankful for what we accomplished this year.
It takes us really nicely into our first reflection point or lesson learned, which is that there is power in a pivot. And I want you to walk our listeners through what we pivoted, or rather how we pivoted this year, and what some of those lessons learned were as we pivoted.
No, I mean, there's, you don't change the goal, right? I think too often they change the goal or they compromise the goal, or they say, I want this, and then they have troubles, there's difficulties, there's challenges, there's setbacks, and they change their goal. They change where they want to go. And pivoting is where you keep the same goal, you keep the same destination, but you change the plan. You make a pivot in the plan based off of, when you create a plan, there's no perfect plan. That's why people that spend too much time planning, and don't execute, it's such a waste of time, because you set a good enough plan, you execute the plan, and then you're going to find areas that plan was bad or didn't work. And sometimes you need to pivot that plan completely. And so I think there's power in pivoting, means it's just you're adjusting along the way. You're adjusting. If I'm headed in a GPS and they're to and somewhere that's 3 hours away, the GPS, if there's a big wreck on the main highway, the GPS is going to take me around that main wreck. And so that's all pivoting is we're still going to the same destination, but with new information, where we say, okay, maybe the plan needs to be adjusted. We're taking that new information and creating a new or an adjusted plan. Yeah.
So in our business, the goal stayed the same, but let's talk about how we pivoted specifically and what that looked like.
Yeah, the big pivot was moving into mid-market, selling mid-market, selling enterprise, because before we were working with very small businesses, and it did get to a point where we felt like we were trying to sell Rolls Royce to people that were looking for a Toyota. And I think when we really looked at the quality of our product and how freaking good we were, we realized that we were just selling to the wrong marketplace. We had some early wins, and so it kind of encouraged us to go down that route.
For context for our listeners too, we had, I would say, about 70% of our revenue came from what we call the smaller business, right? So small to medium-sized businesses. And about 30%, I'd say, was in that mid-market to enterprise sales or enterprise-sized teams.
Yeah.
And we were getting great results for them, amazing clients to work with. But a lot of our time, effort, and energy was in that small to mid-sized business range. And as Tim is mentioning, some of those earlier wins that we saw, the successes that we were getting for those larger clients, it was a very clear, open door. You guys should move to this section. And it's been phenomenal. I think on so many levels, yes, there was the challenging aspect of it, and we will talk about specifically what was challenging about the pivot. But when you know in your gut, that that you have to make a shift. No matter how challenging it is, when you do pivot and you make that shift, it feels so good. And especially when you start to see the small wins and the momentum, it's like so powerful. So I want to encourage anybody that's listening, like there is power in a pivot. And as Tim is mentioning, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're changing the goal, but you can change the plan of action or the plan of attack to get to that goal.
Well, let's be clear. You're not like pivoting, and constantly changing. You're sticking with something long enough to go, is this working? And then you're taking that data and making adjustments to the plan. So what initially felt like, oh, we'll make a couple little shifts and now we're in mid-market and enterprise, ended up becoming, we brought in consultants and we revamped the whole freaking company.
What changed the most was around marketing and sales, for sure.
Yes.
Like the way we marketed, right? The kind of businesses that we were going after. The sales process especially had to change. And we have a whole episode on B2B sales and specifically like how do you tap into that mid-market to enterprise level. Part of a pivot is knowing that it's probably going to be harder than you anticipate.
And so one of the biggest fun things for me about the pivot is, wow, all this work that we do to get our new customers, clients, like they're getting the value that they get out of the exact same meetings with the exact same people we were doing for the small businesses is exponentially larger. I mean, we're talking, 6-figure, 7-figure contracts. And so that's also a very rewarding piece for us, is to know that the hard work that we're putting in to get these kind of meetings, these higher level clients can actually turn into more money.
I think that takes us also into the second, I'd say, lesson learned or kind of experience this year was, no matter how established you are as a business, when you are launching a new product or a new service from scratch, say to a new audience, there is a huge learning curve and it's going to take you longer to launch than you probably anticipate.
I think this year we just realized how true that is, no matter how famous the person is.
Yes, correct.
No matter how famous that person is.
No matter how established the company.
How established the company is, if they are launching a new division, a new product, a new offer, and any of that, and we face this internally, you're going to have to rebuild that sales process from the beginning. You're going to have to dial all those pieces in. He who has the best sales process and the best offer is going to win the deal. And
Absolutely.
That was a big shift that we had to make. We did a lot of competitive analysis. We did a lot of just getting in there, getting on the front lines, me getting back in sales, being willing just to get on that front line and just do calls. And every single call that I would take, it'd be like, okay, what did I do well? What did not go well? It was like a constant, every call was 1% better. And now we're at the point where it's really resonating. It's really hitting. But that takes work to get there. And it takes a lot of intentionality of like looking at all the areas and like literally dialing in every little piece, every friction point, removing, and then testing.
One of the reflections that we had, I want to say a year or two ago in our annual reflection, was to hire help or to ask for help when we needed it. When we were launching something new, getting an outside perspective, hiring a consultant. What we did this year, which I think is a huge win, is when we did make that pivot and the transition, yes, we started it from scratch and we had to be in the trenches, but we also got outside help. Right? We hired consultants. We hired people to give us that other perspective, which accelerated our learning and our growth. And so it's also realizing that, yes, it's going to be a grind. It can be hard. And there is going to be that learning curve, but be smart enough and wise enough as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, to ask for help, to hire help, to get people to come alongside you and provide a different perspective, because that's going to accelerate your growth. I think far too often, I know I run into this where I'm trying to do it myself. I'm going to hustle. I'm going to get it done. But the smarter thing to do is I could have gotten it done a lot faster or more efficiently if I just got a different perspective or had somebody to help.
Yeah, we found people that were incredibly good at enterprise and complex sales, and we just let me just start as a white belt. And I think that's a really challenging thing for people to do, especially the more successful you've been in one arena. Where I absolutely could just dominate 1-2 call closes in the small business market. But if that's not going to translate to this new skill set, let me just start from zero. Let me get coached. Let me get consulting. Let me get training. And
let's talk about Inc. 5000. So if you all don't know, we hit the Inc. 5000 list this year, number 526 in the United States, fastest growing company, and then number 40 in marketing and advertising category. So that was a huge win. I want us to reflect on what that experience was like, and then just a lesson learned around like hitting that list.
I think what was interesting is we hit that list, and when we were also taking the revenue hit by making the pivot.
Correct.
So I think one huge lesson to learn is external victories and wins are just they're historical validations of things that you did in the past were the right activities, right? Because we were in the midst of what felt like challenge, difficulty, and we kind of popped our heads up and we're like, well, let's submit. Let's see if we get the list. And then we got back like, 526, 40th fastest growing marketing agency in the United States. Like, that's pretty cool. We weren't expecting to be that high, but I think it's just a reminder of, for me, when we hit that, I'm like, I had cool, this is a great celebration, but an immediate sobriety of, I don't want to not hit the list next time. I don't want to be, we hit it once and talk about this forever. It made me motivated to want to hit that next list, to keep these things going, because it was the work that we put in 2020, 2022, 2023, that was what gave us the validation for those numbers. And here we are in 2024,
making a huge pivot,
making that huge pivot.
Yes.
And so that was a big thing, is the victories are like just this external validation that is, you could just be being a loser with your company right now and still get that external validation because past work you put in. And so for me, I want to make sure that my future self is thankful for what we did in 2024 and 2025, even though it did cost us a lot of money.
This is just a stepping stone in like what we can accomplish. And I think to other entrepreneurs, it's like being willing to bet on yourself. Yeah. I think sometimes we think also that we're doing worse than we actually are. Right? Comparison is like the thief of joy. We can look at like what other people are doing, and like we compare ourselves all the time and think we're doing worse than we are. But like, take that time to like bet on yourself, to look at yourself, compare yourself to that past version of Cindy, right? What does previous Cindy look like compared to now? And I think that is so validating. And like, the more you bet on yourself, being willing to take the steps to like apply for the lists, to get yourself in front of like the right people, it really does pay off, and it makes the journey so worth it. And I think for our listeners too, if any of you are like seeing other people like hit success and win awards and things like that, also know that there's challenges behind it. Like, and that's why we want to share with you all like the challenges that we've gone through in business specifically this year, is so that one, challenges will happen in business. Like, you're not alone.
It's brutal.
if you're not getting challenged, you probably are not setting your goals high enough. That's number one. Like, challenges are gonna happen, and then just not to compare yourself, because we see the highlights, we see the wins, we see the successes, but we don't actually know what people are going through. So just like, don't compare yourself. And that's a big lesson learned even just for me. And I have to remind myself, like, don't compare yourself, because you do not know what people are going through. One of the things that we reflected on this year was the act of like setting a long-term vision and playing the long game. Yeah. In the space that we were in, like we call it the high ticket space, where you are kind of dealing with the smaller businesses, the more transactional, it is very easy to be in like that hand to mouth type of process, right? Like, what did we make this year? How much money did we make this week? How many deals did we close? And it becomes so transactional that you're like living week to week, month to month. One thing that in this pivot, us transitioning towards the mid-market enterprise sales, one thing that we resolved this year was we want to play the long game. Why don't you talk a little bit more about just what that playing the long game has looked like for us in the business?
So when we talk about playing the long game, we have a daily sense of urgency. Mm-hmm. Like, when I wake up, when I'm playing the long game, I'm thinking about, okay, how do I build a company that endures through all the different technologies? How do I build a company that is, worth $100 million, worth $200 million, worth $500 million, like long term? What does that company look like, where I'm not dependent on, okay, are my Facebook ads getting me the right KPIs this week so that my offer is profitable, and like this like up and down of trying to make all your razor thin margins work so you can sell, however much money this month, and then, brag about that. I'm thinking, how do I build a company that's long term? But also, that building that long term requires today urgency, because when you're playing the long game, your urgency of today becomes compounded, or your procrastination of today becomes compounded. Yeah. playing long game does not mean not being urgent. Like
good.
every day you have to be urgent, that what I do today is going to have a compounding effect 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months down the road.
I love that you mentioned it isn't that delay. There isn't procrastination. You can have both, and you actually must have both. And I think today, just with the way society is and how fast things are changing, especially with AI, as a business, in order to keep up, you have to be able to make those pivots really fast, those micro, like the small increments, the small changes that you make to be able to sustain.
With persistence, with a relentless, never willing to give up, no matter how much it takes, you're going to win. Absolutely. Because most people don't have urgency. Most people don't have long-term thinking, and most people don't have persistence and resilience to stick with it as long as it takes to win. So if you can have those three things, you're going to dominate. It might not be tomorrow, but if you stick with it, you're absolutely going to dominate your sector.
And our last reflection point, our 2024 reflection, is around the concept of like everything happens in seasons. And as a business owner, as a high performer, always thinking about your next. What does that next season look like? We were also very intentional about the seasons, and specifically, we were very intentional about our 6 months business savings. Like, we put away profits. We have 6 months of like emergency fund or business savings in the event that winter comes, because it always will. That's just how the cycles of business work. So we were very intentional and smart about making sure that we had savings in place in the business for just in case, right? Winter's always coming.
For instance, with what City's saying with us, making sure we're diligent with our profits and stashing money, stashing money for emergency, and having that business that allowed us to make that shift in the mid-market. And we literally just cut off working with small businesses, and it allowed us to make that shift and go all in, while also still, having the funds to travel, to do events, to go to important places that we want to go, to do the Inc. 5, to do all that and keep investing in the business. And so, yes, you absolutely, I think a mistake that I see a lot of people make is, and I made this early on when I had my early successes in entrepreneurship, is, you start making all that money and you see all the profit coming in, and you upgrade the car, you upgrade the condo, you upgrade the house. And I'm all about like getting nice things, especially putting yourself in a good environment. But we were very disciplined on stashing that money away. When we could have done a lot of luxuries, we stashed that money away, and it allowed us to make this big pivot. So it wasn't as much that we used the emergency savings for an emergency as much as we were able to use that money saved for a pivot.
For those listening, making sure that you are diligent about both today and tomorrow, thinking about what that upcoming season looks like. What does that next season look like? And always preparing for like worst case scenario, making sure that your business is in a good place. Because even 2020, right? How many businesses went under because they didn't have business savings, or they weren't financially equipped. They weren't thinking about that, like winter is coming. Think about that with regards to your business when you're planning for 2025 and beyond. What does it look like to set your business up for success when winter will come, because it's always coming?
Like also having money for when those kind of things come about. Hey, we want to develop this new product. Okay, well, we've got cash for that. Or, hey, instead of developing a new product, we want to acquire a company that is already developing that, or already working on that. I think that's kind of where our next mindset is over the next few years, is probably more so in the acquiring clients. So it can be a winter's coming and you want to have the cash there for that, but it can also be like, hey, there's going to be really good opportunities that if you have cash, that cash power is going to allow you to do some really cool moves. So yeah, that's it. That's our 2024 yearly reflections. So we do that with each other. Cindy and I will do that together, but we also bring it to our team and we say, hey, what are lessons learned? Because the biggest failure that you're going to have in a failure is a failure to learn the lesson. And so do this, with your partner, with yourself, and then bring it to your team. You and I always do it first, so we have clarity on the overall reflections, but then we bring the team in. Hope you enjoyed this episode. The biggest thing is I want you to walk away from this episode with what are 1 or 2 things that you can do right now to make your business better, to make sure that your strategy is better, to make sure that you're leveling up. So make sure you're going to walk away from this with at least 1 or 2 things that you're going to do to level up your business. Now just remember, domination is not a destination, it's a way of life. Stay winning.